Hello and welcome to the garden. It is a thoroughly miserable day here and I hope you can't hear too much noise from the rain. Nothing I can do about that, but it does make a bit of a racket on the polycarbonate roof here, so I hope that doesn't interfere too much with the video. But anyway, on a day like today, a little bit of greenhouse work is very welcome, and I've got my very young pepper and chili seedlings here. They are still pretty small and they could stay in here for, well, some weeks for sure, and they'd be perfectly all right. But I do like to prick these out when they are still quite small, when it's easy to get them out without too much root disturbance. And they're different seedlings transplant with varying degrees of success. Peppers are one of the easiest. I mean, I'll be doing, I don't know, 80 something plants this year, I expect, and I don't imagine I will lose a single one of the seedlings that I prick out. Partly that's because I will do it quite carefully, but also because these transplant really well. I mean, in general, if the seedling has relatively small and quite fleshy leaves like these do, then they transplant very nicely. If they've got large, thin leaves like lettuce, for example, then they can suffer, especially if you're doing it on a hot day. And with things like lettuce, it's really important to get to them when they are quite young, because then they'll transplant a lot more easily. When they've got a good leaf area, they lose so much moisture through those leaves that when you move them on, they're very likely to flop somewhat. It doesn't mean that you'll lose them, but you can lose some, especially on a hot day. Even if you put them in the shade, which is really a good idea with lettuce seedlings, even then they can still suffer when you transplant them. But with a bit of care, I shouldn't lose one of these. And over the years, I don't ever remember losing a pepper seedling. So these really are one of the easiest things to prick out and move on. As usual, I will give a couple of tips for doing this. And you know, different gardeners, they've got different methods, and do what you like in your own garden. For me, I like to take my time and try and do it with a bit of care. And I have seen videos where it's done with some, to be honest, some ham-fisted butchery, and the gardener in question expects to then lose a portion of their seedlings. And well, you can do it that way, prick out twice as many as you need, you'll probably be fine, and do it in a rush. But if you take your time with, especially with peppers and chilies, you can be fairly confident, I think, that you're not going to lose any of them. And more importantly than that, these seedlings shouldn't suffer from being transplanted or very little. If you wait until they're bigger, they will tend to suffer more. But when they're this sort of size, they shouldn't really suffer. If you've transplanted something and it's sulking for a week before it picks up again, that process hasn't been quite right for the seedling. So there are three tips really for doing this with care. The first one is never to handle the stems, only handle the seedling by the leaf. And I mean, you can wait until the first set of true leaves come out, that's fine. I can just see them starting on the larger ones of these, but I think it's perfectly fine to take them out when they've just got their seed leaves. But one of those tricks is never to touch that stem. It's very, very tender there, and just under the surface you've got all the vascular tissues, and it's so easy to manhandle them, crush them a little bit, especially with chunky digits like these. So I never touch the stems. The second thing is I like to get something in the soil here, get under the root and tease up that root as carefully as possible. It's so easy if you put a bit of tension on the seedling as you're trying to get it out, for part of that root to break, and that's the last thing you want. You want to do as little disturbance to the root as you possibly can. And then the final thing is, when you're sticking them in a pot, and I'm going to move them onto these 7 centimetre square pots, it's a reasonable size to put them in, and they can stay in those until I then move them on rather later. And they stack really well in the propagator, no wasted space with a square pot. What you often see is somebody make a hole, put the seedling in, and then firm in from the top. And if you think about it, that doesn't properly move the soil around the root. Make a good sized hole, drop the seedling in, that's fine. But you really want to firm in from the side, so get something down there, pushing the soil against the root gently, and then give it a good soak. It doesn't matter how much moisture there is in the compost. This isn't too dry here, but that's again to help wash that soil around the root. And those 3 tips, they apply to anything that you're pricking out. Because peppers and chilies transplant really well, I can do them now, or I could wait until they're a little bit bigger. And I'm not going to remove these trays, even though I'm not going to lose any. I'm pretty sure I will always keep some as spares. But if these were larger leaved with softer leaves, I would want to get to them when they're nice and young. But anyway, these are easy to handle at this size, so I'm going to get on with that. Now, I've got a bunch of varieties, and thankfully everything has germinated. The one thing that's been slow, and I think I've only got 3 up so far, is the Dolce de Bergamo. No idea why that one is tardy this time, but they are starting to show up, and like I say, I've got at least 3 come up already, so they might follow. The aubergine is a little bit behind. I will probably leave those today. Everything else is in fit state to go. An interesting one is I grow 2 of the bull's horn peppers, Corno de Toro, the Rosso and Giallo, the red and the yellow. And this has happened, I think, pretty much every time I've looked at the seedlings. I think this has happened. The yellow is always a bit slower to germinate than the red. And all of the red were up, and not a single of the yellow some days ago. And that does seem to be a pattern. And I've had seed from different suppliers, so I don't know, it's an oddity. I've also noticed with the plants, I think the yellow ones, if anything, are a little bit more productive. They both produce good sized plants and good sized fruit, but the yellow in particular, large fruits and a lot of them. So even though essentially they're the same sort of pepper, there are some subtle differences that go beyond just the colour. And if I was only going to grow one, it would be the yellow, I think. A little bit slower to germinate, but when it gets going, I think it's, if anything, a slightly better plant. That's just a curiosity. Another curiosity are these purple jalapenos. Now, I've not grown these before. I've grown jalapenos before, but not the purple one. But I have grown various other purple chilies, and very often you find that there's some pigment on either the young leaves in particular, not typically the old leaves, but very often the young leaves, and also on the young stems. But this is an interesting, I'm afraid it's not going to show up well on the camera. I can't get too close, it won't focus, but I've got a little group here where there's a lot of pigment on these seedlings. I've got this one here where there's none, and a couple which they're just slightly a moody green colour, but there's definitely a big difference in the amount of pigment that these have come up with. I've no reason to think that these are the wrong sort. I mean, that one there's one that has no noticeable pigment, but these others, they've all got some. And what I'm going to do with that one is prick out the most colourful looking. just because. I mean, if I'm growing a purple jalapeno, I might as well have those plants with the most pigment. They might look very attractive later on. I mean, it doesn't make any difference really, but it's just a curiosity. So I don't need all of these seedlings. I will pick out the most colourful ones. And in the other cases, I'm going to pick out either those that are easiest to get to without disturbing those that I want to leave, or then the biggest and best looking specimens. Anyway, that's my job today. I'm going to get on with it. So here I've got my usual sort of compost blend. It's got some sieved multi-purpose, some coir, a little bit of vermiculite. I think this one has less coir in than what I'd used for seed sowing. There's more actual compost in it. And there's a little bit of fish blood and bone in this, just a touch of feed. So they're going to be in here for a little while. It's quite a light compost. So I'm just going to fill that to the top. Just give it a little bit of a push. I don't want it too compact. Okay, so I want to make a good sized hole here. Plenty big, plenty deep, because I'd like I don't know how much root they'll have on them, but I'd like it to drop down in that hole nicely, not get all scrunched up. And then I just want to get an implement of some sort down underneath that root there. This is a very nice one. And gently tease it up. I'm not putting much force on that. And there we go. And actually that's got a really nice root. And you can see all those, well, hopefully you could see all of those fine roots there. And if I were to pull on this just a little bit, manhandle this, I would be breaking off a lot of this fine root. And that is the last thing I want to do. So good size hole so that that root will drop right in the, I'm not going to muck up that root ball. And actually I'm going to set these nice and deep. Okay, and then I want to get down the side and bring the soil in so it's nicely around all of that root. That's what I meant about not just pressing from the top, because that doesn't bring the soil around nicely around the bottom. That's it, and a good soak. And that is going to be a happy little seedling. And in fact, it will shoot away in here. But yeah, it's a nice, easy job. I don't rush it, but it's not that time consuming. Just being very gentle. And there we go. We get all of that root out. And in fact, I've got a rogue there. That is a piece of weed. I don't know what that is. Go away. But yeah, there's a nice bit of root on that. It would be a shame to damage it. So make sure it's in there properly. And then firm in from the sides. Right, so now for these purple jalapenos, and interestingly, those with the most pigment are the smaller of the seedlings. Well, maybe that's to be expected. I don't need many of these, so let's just get that out. Oh, it's a lovely long root on that. You can see just how easy it would be to to lose this bottom part of the root or some of those little bits on the side. That's quite a nice little job really, and it's just as well I don't mind it. I've probably got 70-80 plants to prick out today, so I'm going to get on with that. Now they're going in one of the propagators here, and these are heated propagators, so I'm not going to have any problems with cold nights. The only thing is that the temperature can drop in them a little bit lower than is ideal, so these can, according to the specification, give a lift of up to 12 degrees above the ambient. So during the daytime, they're really toasty in these propagators. So where I've been germinating these, I've had them on 21. I don't like to push it too high when they're outdoors, because if the sun pops out, it's a nice clear day, in the enclosed space of the propagator, the temperature will really spike. So I like to have that at the lower end of the ideal range for germinating the peppers, and similarly when I start the tomatoes here, which will be quite soon. When they're growing on, you can drop that temperature down, and I think the most I would have them at that point is 18, and maybe 16 wouldn't be too bad. If it's too warm, you get a lot of lush but weak growth, and okay, the light levels are improving, but they're still not brilliant yet. And too much warmth, slightly poor light, and you get some leggy, soft growth, and the plants aren't nearly as good as if they're grown on at a slightly lower temperature. Now at night, let's say we go down to -2, something like that. Obviously these propagators, they'll probably drop to 10 degrees. And if you get a really cold spell, they might dip below that. And 10 degrees is sort of the level where you don't want these plants to really go below that. Some would say maybe 12 degrees is the minimum nighttime temperature. To be honest, it's never been a problem for me. I don't mind if these temperatures go down a little bit lower than is. You don't want it cold. You don't want to put these chilli plants in 5 degrees or something. They'll really be unhappy. But if it drops to 10, 9 degrees, it's really not a problem. And it's very unlikely to go lower than that here in the south at this time of year. If it is going to be going lower than that, it's probably a good idea to wrap these up with a bit of bubble wrap or some extra insulation, just to keep that minimum temperature down. But again, during the daytime for growing on, you don't want it to get too hot here. I wouldn't have this at 21, and I don't want them at 21. I'll come in and I'll ventilate it on a hot day to try and keep that temperature a little bit lower, because I think you'll get much better plants if you drop that temperature down. 16 degrees is I think more than enough. So I will adjust this propagator, turn it down a bit, and these will grow on to be good productive plants, I hope. But anyway, that is all for this video. Thanks ever so much for watching, and bye for now.